everyone. My name is Jordan Farmer. This is the Uncommon Conversations podcast, where we try to have an interesting and groundbreaking conversation every single time. Today, my guest is Claudia Andrea, who has done some TV work, by my understanding, and who is an immigrant and who is from Chile. And so we're going to be exploring topics that are kind of self-evidently, in the theme of that. And here she is, so we should be able to get right into it quickly. Yes. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
I like the groundbreaking. It's kind of making me step up my game, I guess.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, it's more so that, people tend to have conversations where they're repeating a lot of the same points, and I like
Right.
to, it's better to get something new out there. Otherwise, why are you putting a podcast out there? It seems like a
Right.
waste of airspace. So,
Yeah.
anywho, so please, for me and for my audience, give us an intro into you and your career and sort of who you are now and in the world.
Cool. My name is Claudia Andrea. I'm originally from Chile, from Patagonia, actually, in South America. I came to the US when I was 10, and I am so grateful to be a patriotic Chilean and a patriotic American. And I have, in the last few years, gotten into doing on-camera work, acting and hosting TV, and I love going crazy on social media with lives and everything. And actually, during 2020, things locked down, so there was no more commercials or music videos to be in. And I got tied to people who were trying to make a movement in the freedom movement, or the reopen California and reopen the country movement. And I shared some of my Instagram skills with them, and then I got a job kind of going along with the Freedom Tour USA and 1776 Forever Free and Dr. Cordy Williams, the Megaphone Marine. And I helped to elevate their message through social media, and got to do a lot of cool things and travel through these rallies and get to know a lot of cool people who are trying to make a difference in this country and then in turn in the world. So I'm very passionate about keeping freedom for all. And I know as an immigrant how important it is for America to get it right, because all eyes are on America at all times and everybody kind of follows suit. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm also a single mom of 3. And fortunately, I'm able to do a lot of this work at my own pace, but trying to do, right by my kids and in this world, and hopefully inspire some good action in the process.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, that's really cool. That's some really interesting work to have been, a part of and to have done. And yeah, I've seen Dr. Cordy Williams on Instagram and seen a lot of his posts and interacted with him a little bit, and I definitely like what I see. Obviously, it's interesting because you made a point, and it's so true. Like, no one cares about Norway as a beacon of freedom, even though they're pretty free, right? But no one associates it that way internationally.
Right.
It's not the place, right? So
Right.
we do have that obligation as America to stay true to our values and our freedoms, because if we don't stand up for that, who the heck will? We are
Absolutely.
the big giant domino at the beginning, and then once it goes,
Yes.
who knows what
Yeah.
happens. So
Well, and people forget that the US was founded on immigration, right? Like people coming from
mhm.
another place to find something better, and then worked really hard and purposefully to develop something better that then other nations and other people and other immigrants were attracted to. So it's important to preserve that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we're one of the few. I mean, I think our population is the highest in the world for foreign-born citizens. It's like 15% or something.
I
It's
believe that. Wow.
it's huge. And so you talked about, you've worked with sort of Cuban people and on the front of things going on in Cuba there. Could you talk a little bit about that and
Yeah,
what's going on there?
absolutely. So it's timely today because so I've moved from California to Arizona, Phoenix area, and a lot of the reasons have to do with what's happened in the last year or so. But so I got connected during, we started learning about what Cuba was going through, and I had kind of been educated myself on what had kind of happened in the history of Cuba. I found it really fascinating and interesting, and so when this kind of became trendy in the last few months, and the Cuban people were finally standing up against the communist regime. I'm always someone who wants to do my part however I can. And so I looked up like Cubans in Arizona, and I wonder what they're doing, and I wonder what they need help with. So I got connected with a friend. His handle is SOS Cuba Arizona. And I actually helped him to get a, what did he call it? Yeah, like a gathering today. He's saying it's not a protest, it's not this and that, but just a gathering to kind of remind people, especially in this area, that Cuba still needs the help of the U.S. And, you know, I say the U.S. has kind of become, or maybe always been, kind of like a big brother to the rest of the world, who comes and rescues, you know, somebody who needs help. And we've kind of, I think the U.S. has kind of accepted that role. And so as much as we want to say, oh, that's another country, why is it the responsibility of this country, right? It's not their responsibility, but we know how much of an impact, and maybe the only saving grace could be the U.S. To Cuba and their situation. So today, actually, today at 6 p.m., we're meeting, and you can see on my profile a flyer that I created, but a group of people in the area are getting together to kind of bring more awareness and remind people that Cuba's still not free, that we would love to have the help of the U.S. They say in a way of humanitarian or military intervention. And they also recognize how much the current administration, it doesn't care about that, and is not aiding in that way. So yeah,
This is a brief side note, but he barely cares about the Afghanistan situation when he's been confronted. Like, this is not a controversial thing. When he's been confronted in the press to get extra questions, he's like, I don't want to talk about it. Whatever, I'll push it off. And let alone, you know, we're is it 6 weeks or like 8 weeks since Cuba was like in the headlines, right? And it's like already forgotten in the collective consciousness. Like and it's, in some sense, that's just internet culture and the times we live, and that's how it's always been. Like, you've never had a lot of people on the everyday side of things that could stick, you know, that are tracking things over 10 years, you know, that's very rare. So you know, that's a tremendous issue where, like, yeah, 2 months ago, we're all like, you know, libertad, and now we're like Afghanistan, and it's, you know, it's like squirrel, you know, it's much more tragic and serious than that, but that is kind of how it works. And if an administration, like, I like the bully pulpit, or the using your voice when you have it. If you were in that kind of a position and you were competent, you would be bringing up the Cuba situation and continually reminding the people. You'd be playing that sort of role, and that's, you know, I'm all for being persuasive and guiding when you're straightforward. If you're manipulative, or if it's the kind of BS of politics where they're trying to tell you something, like when Fauci said that masks aren't necessarily won't work for everyone, you know, we kind of just need it for the frontline workers.
Right.
Like, that was to get a response out of the public, not to educate or inform the public and tell them what they should do. And that creates such a distrust, and it's unnecessary, because if everyone was just told N95s are where it should be, you know, these, you know, next grade, I think it's like the RK74 or something, but the standard little blue and white ones you put on are like pretty good after that. And we have limited supply, so please don't buy too much. And then as the production ramps up, because we have the biggest capitalistic guy in the world as the president, who's obviously going to be happy to force manufacturing, you know, but there was no inventiveness in that, from that perspective from him. It was just, well, the people might behave wrongly, so we need to lie to them. And I'm like, that's standard practice, you know, and it's a shame. It's a real shame.
Sadly, we get used to that, right?
Yeah.
From what I heard when I was in California, that Newsom had like some $2 billion deal with China for masks. Like, it should have been seen at the very least as a conflict of interest. Aside from all the other things that the damages that mask wearing causes, not only for health, but for culture and child development and all that yucky stuff.
Yeah, and it's the way they get away with that is they say, well, the proper use of masks are blah, 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 and they don't explain if you reuse a mask over and over, if you start getting mold or pneumonia or bacteria or things that are like recirculating, like, and with kids, if a lot of these people don't have kids or haven't had little kids in a long time, they don't understand, like, the functionality of a 3-year-old with snot coming out of their nose caring about or actually using a mask. And well, and then we're hitting a crazier level where they're talking about vaccines for people under 12. Like, I don't know. Like, I guess that's more normal for vaccines for young kids, but I've always felt like now I haven't done my research, but I've always felt like it's a little too young when we're giving people these vaccines. You got to let them sort of develop and become more resilient. An 8-year-old's more resilient than a baby. Everyone, like, this is self-evident and everyone understands that. Immune system wise too, most, kids that die from an illness, it's not at 7 or 8. Usually it's usually earlier or, later in life. But anyway, sorry, I
See,
kind of ranted
no,
there a
that's
little.
okay. No, these are two topics that get me very heated, and I have so much to say on them, but I want to make a couple points I'd be remiss not to mention. So, one, when have you ever worn a mask before when there were like bigger, more serious illnesses, right? Two, that people don't realize the aspect of like child trafficking. Someone told me recently that in a local Sam's Club, like very recently in the last month or two, there was a mom shopping with her little child, her little girl. She turns around, her little girl's gone. She tells the store manager, they shut down the place, and they find the little girl in the bathroom with somebody who had kidnapped her, already shaving her head, changing her clothes, and putting on a mask. So wearing a mask is aiding in this. Like, how do you recognize a child in a sea of masks? Elizabeth Smart, when she was trapped, when she was kidnapped, she would be in public with a mask. They made her wear a mask and made it look like a religious thing, right? So how do you find a perpetrator within a sea of masks? How do you find a lost child in a sea of masks? So for me, it goes so beyond there. It's a huge principle. A mask is also an occult ritual to silence the mouthpiece of God. So I put on a mask one time for like 5 minutes to get on a plane, and then I figured out another way to not get in trouble. But I'm very against it. It's a huge principle. Aside from the data, and we don't have enough data that shows that they do help, but we do have a lot of data that shows that they trap parasites, that they bring up staph infections, that they block the normal breathing cycle. People say that it's extreme to say a mask is child abuse, but if you look up like the government official definition of child abuse, part of it is inhibiting bodily function. So it's like case closed.
Mm.
People are just, stubborn and want to make also the blue masks that you mentioned have like a plastic bag material. It's like a propylene or something like that. That I think on the box says like it could be a choking hazard, like you should never have it over your face. And so I
Mm.
could go on and on. The other thing with the jabs, with the injection, stop calling it a vaccine. It's not a vaccine. It's a clinical trial of like some biological experiment. It's not yet a vaccine. A vaccine takes, I think, over 12 years to become one. And so we're calling it. So that's how these people can get away and say, oh yeah, the vaccine is super safe and this and that, because they're not talking about the actual jab that people are getting. That's not a vaccine. So there's so many things that people need to dig deeper on to really understand. I'm always one that wants to get to the root of it and the why. And when I understand the why, then I can make a better decision. So sadly, there's a lot of people who are being misinformed. And yeah, like children shouldn't be experiments, especially children. And do we forget that at the beginning of all this, people said, oh, the children don't get it that bad, or they barely pass it on. So there's like, we're getting sidetracked, and we're getting distracted by things that aren't even real at this point,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's been a lot of honestly, like once it was interesting. So like when the first wave started to crash in the United States and we were coming close to zero was right when the George Floyd story happened and mass protests broke out, and you saw
Interesting, huh?
the demographics, like all of the numbers, like I looked into it at the time, all the numbers it was like, 10 to 14 days out or whatever the timeline was. Um, the numbers like exploded after that, and um, the demographics changed to younger people.
Mm.
And that to me was pretty solid evidence of it being a function of this change in behavior that had happened. But after that, and many stages after that, there's just kind of been an escalating paranoia and a legit hysteria around that. Now I want to go point by point through what you ran through. What was that? First of
Yeah.
all, what was that girl's name? Elizabeth what?
Elizabeth Smart. She was in the
Smart.
90s, I think. She was kidnapped in her bedroom when she was like 12. Does that ring a
Yeah.
bell to you? Do you know what I'm talking about?
So I've looked into, so like I watched oh, what was that thing? What was that show called? America's Most Wanted back in the day. And so I
Yeah.
learned a lot about those stories of it was a lot of human trafficking stuff. I think his daughter was kidnapped and raped and murdered. So it was,
Yeah.
and my mom was a rape response advocate in the early
Oh,
2000s. So So
Okay.
I was more, maybe not always to a healthy degree, but I was more in tune with the dangers of that world and what's really happening, maybe from a younger age than most people. Most people
Right.
think it's like this movie background, evil bad guys, doesn't actually happen kind of thing. And it's like,
Right.
the people that would participate in these kinds of activities have every motivation to hide it and to keep it in the background and to keep people thinking it's kind of a ridiculous notion in the first place. So and
Right.
I had a manipulation in my younger life that was around me. So I learned to be aware and fearful of manipulation. And
Mm.
that allowed me to read people and to sort of understand, like, if I can't follow their line of thinking and if the things don't add up and if it's making me feel a way that doesn't really make sense to me, that's sort of instinctual points on which you can start being like, okay, what's happening here? And then and then eventually you gain the better tools on how to recognize those things. But so the occult
I said that
ritual
because I
thing.
feel like,
No, go ahead.
mhm.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, I just want to mention that I really value that you said that because kind of the whole way that I woke up to the corruption and what was going on, I've never really followed politics, and it wasn't until 2020 and like this virus that I started paying attention to things and going deeper. And it was like I felt like it was like half God communicating to me and half my intuition of like, hey, there's something else, like look into it and do some research behind what you see on the headlines. So I really value that you say that, and I want to honor that because I recognize